Okay, so today is January 6th, 2014, and I would like to thank and welcome Jamel Shabazz, who is our interviewee today, who's agreed to participate in our ongoing oral history project collected by the Department of Special Collections and FIT Archives here at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Jamel was so kind enough last year, probably in the fall of last year, to donate a collection of 50 of his photographs to us. So today we're going to speak a little bit more about his work in general and specifically about some of the specific images that he has donated to the collection. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, I was just hoping that you could tell us a little bit about how you came to be a photographer. I understand from our previous conversations that your father was a photographer.
Yes, I was very fortunate to have a father that was a professional photographer in the Navy. He had spent 6 years on the USS Intrepid as a young 17-year-old photographer. You know, he had traveled the Mediterranean. So when he returned home in the 1950s, he came home with a massive body of work. And as a young child, I became very fascinated with the images in which he created. And I always found myself constantly looking at his images. And I was just blown away behind not only the travel images, but just the portraits of fellow sailors and Marines. And it kind of like stimulated something inside me, in addition to the fact that he had a wide range of photography books in his library. So when I wasn't looking at my school books, you know, I always went into his collection, and I was just blown away behind just the power of images. So it was through his photographs that really kind of like planted the seed in my mind.
And you were born here in New York.
Yes, I was.
And grew up in Brooklyn.
Yes.
In the 1970s.
Yes.
Came of age in the 70s.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit of what it was like to come of age in Brooklyn and in New York City in general during that time period?
It was a very interesting time period, you know, from my perspective. You know, the Vietnam War was still going on, so I was constantly seeing the images of that war and soldiers or military personnel returning home. There was a heroin epidemic at the time, so, you know, I would see, you know, the results of that. But it was a very interesting time, you know, for me in the early 70s because, you know, my family moved out of the Red Hook projects and into a private home in East Flatbush. So, we were making a lot of strides and, you know, I connected with a lot of wonderful people that were striving as well. But something tragic happened in the mid-1970s, and it seems like a lot of our parents divorced. And when they divorced, many of us went astray. You know, I gravitated to the culture of graffiti with a lot of my other peers, and that was my way of self-expression, trying to just, you know, kind of like just make a name for myself. And it was gang culture was kind of like flourishing at the same time too. So it was a point of out of gravitating towards that culture, or how can I say it, just trying to juggle with school, but with having divorced parents, it became very difficult. So for me as a teenager, it was a very trying time. You know, coming from a stable household and now, you know, entering a family that's divorced, it kind of like just put me in a very difficult position, searching. And again, it was very tense times. You know, gangs were flourishing everywhere. You know, it wasn't anyone really dying at that time, but just the fact that just, you know, that type of negativity was existing. So at 17, I enlisted in the United States Army and I went to Germany. So from 1977 to 1980, I got away. You know, I didn't want to be a burden on my parents, so it allowed me an escape. And it actually changed my life. And not only did I do it, but a lot of my peers also came from divorced parents. I think that we had that same idea that we didn't want to be a burden, so we decided the military would be the best way to get away and take that burden off them.
Was it after that you came back from being in the military that you started with photography, or had you begun experimenting with photography earlier than that?
I dabbled in photography in 1975. So you know, I took my mother's Instamatic camera and I played around with that. But I was able to really create some dynamic photographs of my peers. They were well-composed portraits of just, you know, my peers I went to school with. But it's when I went into Germany, you know, stationed in Germany, that I really developed a deeper appreciation for photography because I became homesick, and I understood at that point the value of images. And I vowed that once I returned back home, I would always document my life. So when I returned back during the summer of 1980, that I came home with a new camera, Canon AE-1, and I went on a mission to just document my world. And that particular body of work really started to be a visual diary.
And besides photography, when you came back after being in the military around in 1980, what were some of your other interests, or what were you looking at visually at that time?
I was looking at young people. And in looking at them, because I returned back to my old community, my old high school, and when I saw young people, I saw individuals that were pretty much in a similar situation as myself when I was younger. Many of them had also gone through problems with their families, and I wanted to be a big brother to a lot of young people. And I found that the camera gave me an opportunity to engage them. So a lot of my earlier photographs are actually at 2 local high schools I would go to on a regular, because when I first came home, I had about a year off to just kind of like just be free. I just said I didn't want to work anymore. I just wanted to take time off. So I would go to one of the local high schools, Samuel J. Tilden, and the camera served as like a magnet. It drew a lot of young people to me. Being a lot of these kids were like my friends' younger brothers and sisters, a lot of them knew me. So it gave me a perfect opportunity to talk to them about the importance of education and planning for the future. The photograph later on became evidence of the conversation. So early on, my interest was really just young people, engaging them. I came home, I was still motivated behind being in the military, so I worked out every day. So a lot of times these kids would see me working out in the street, running, and that kind of like drew them to me also. And when I developed friendships with them, I would invite them to my home and introduce them to jazz music and chess.
And you talked, what my next question really was, you've already touched on this a little bit, which is that your photographs often seem to really capture the essence of that person.
Yes.
And they have opened up to you so beautifully. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you choose your specific subjects, and it seems like you've already touched on that, about forming that connection with with your subject.
It's really about communication and being sincere. And when I see a lot of young people back then, even today, I say to them, and I say with all sincerity, when I look at you, I see greatness and hope, and I want to record your legacy. And a lot of times I seek out subjects that represent confidence. So a lot of my photographs, people feel good about themselves. They're clean, and they want to be recognized for the most part. And I see that in them, and I realize in their style of dress that they feel good when someone compliments them. So as a photographer, I have an opportunity both to compliment you, but to record your legacy. So I look for the confidence, I look for history, I look for different themes. One of the gifts that my father taught me early on as a photographer was to have themes. So my initial theme when I came home from the military was students. And then it would go on to best friends, brothers and sisters, cousins. So I always had themes, and my subjects got it. When I would approach them, explain them what I'm trying to do, they got it, and they always agreed to allow me to photograph them. Because again, my intent was really to make people feel good about themselves. It was beyond just being a photographer. I want to engage people and let them know I see greatness in you. When I was younger, somebody said that to me and inspired me to go on a particular path. Again, dealing with a situation where your parents are divorced, not really feeling good about yourself. So when you have someone that's recognized your talent and they say that to you for the first time, it inspires you, to sit back and say, wow, somebody sees something inside me. So I wanted to just, the camera allowed me to plant seeds in all of my subjects. I'll take the photograph, but I'm saying things to make you think. I might speak about the importance of education. I might speak about the importance of just protecting our community, not polluting. But I want to have a conversation with you. So it's beyond just, just the subjects itself. I just saw individuals with potential. And I want to just make my difference and try to say something that might inspire young people. I didn't mean to be so long-winded.
No, thank you. That was beautiful. My next question to you was, in many of your photographs, we see the same poses again and again, and they seem to be a certain sort of nonverbal communication. How much of the poses is coming from within the subject themselves, their choice, or how much is it coming from a little bit of art direction on your part?
I think it's 50-50. A lot of times when I first started out, I'll meet willing participants who want to be photographed. And a lot of times they would say to me, well, what do you want me to do? It's like, wow, I never thought about that before. So now I had to think about ideas on how to create situations that look good. And I reverted back to the old album covers of back in the days. And when I look back at the album covers of the Jackson 5, the Temptations, the Four Tops, Kool and the Gang, those subjects were well posed on those albums. So it was looking at those album covers that gave me an idea on how to pose my subjects. So again, 50% of it was me, and then there was another side of it was just them. I might see guys positioned somewhere. I said, don't even move. That's perfect. And I found myself doing it a lot of times where, subjects would agree and they would go into something else. No, keep it just like that. That's just ideal. So, it was a perfect exchange between myself and my subjects.
In one of your books, and this is something that you touched on a bit, back in the days, you talk about actively trying to capture images of gang culture of the late 1970s and early 1980s. And I'm sure there's certain visual clues in a lot of these photographs that would be lost on a lot of people.
Yes.
And other images that you've taken of members of fraternal organizations, the same.
Yes.
Do any of the photographs that we have here in the collection capture that sort of symbolic gesture or style?
I say that the photograph right there does, those two young men. Of course, so when I grew up, we had a gang called the Jolly Stompers, and unlike the gangs of the 1970s, how they are perceived in terms of wearing cut-off leather jackets with fur collars, the Jolly Stompers is a very unique gang. They consisted of African Americans and a lot of young men from the Caribbean, so they brought a mixture between Caribbean culture and African American culture into the equation. And what I found out later on, especially from people from the Caribbean, they gravitated towards westerns. So a lot of them will wear hats, almost like cowboy hats. So you'll find within this photograph, you have these guys with these velour hats on that were very popular amongst that particular gang back in the days. And when I first was introduced to photography by the way of a gang member from that crew, his photographs just astonished me that you had all these men that were upright, dignified, with the swagger and wearing these hats. And at that point I said, I want to create images like that. So I was drawn towards just capturing that image, not the gang itself, but just the confidence they represented. So you'll find in a lot of my photographs in general, you see that confidence and swagger, and a lot of it stemmed from the early photographs that I saw. And even when I captured the fraternities and sororities, it's a link between that and gang culture too. And I say that to say that, you have a lot of young people that gravitate towards gangs because they want to belong. And you have young people that gravitate towards fraternities because they want to belong to something. And I find that in fraternities in which I shot, they represent colors, and it could be blue, it could be red. And in gangs, you have crews that represent colors at the same time too. So for me, it's just all about really just recognizing the strength within the individuals and just wanting to record their legacy with understanding and empathy at the same time. So I'll shoot the gang member no differently than I'll shoot the young man who's in a fraternity.
Of course, because one of your main goals is to document people's lives.
Yes.
Which leads into my next question, which is in the process of documenting these young people's lives, you also managed to capture the birth of a style that we now associate with hip-hop culture. But at that time, of course, when it was emerging, it wasn't necessarily called hip-hop. When is the first time you recall hearing the phrase hip-hop? And can you tell us a little bit about what that meant to you then, and a little bit about what that means to you now? Are they different?
Yes, well, I think I first heard the term hip-hop back in 1979 when I was in Germany, when Rappers Delight, the Sugar Hill Gang came out with the song Rappers Delight, and that's when we heard a hip-hop. And whatever, that was the first time I actually heard that term. Years later, then I would hear the whole term itself, hip-hop. But when I actually first grew up, we just called the music itself dropping science. People get on a microphone and just rhyme. But when that particular song came out, that's when it and it became an international song. I think it kind of mushroomed into what became hip hop today.
Do you think that music was important in the conjunction of the development of these certain fashion trends that we would now call hip hop style? No doubt about it, because it was a hip hop artist that took this to the stage, the international stage, and with their music, it caused a lot of young people to look at them a certain way, and they kind of became the fashion setters at that time. So when you saw Run DMC back in the days, and they wore their velour hats and their Adidas sneakers, and even when they were singing about Adidas, it inspired young people to put Adidas on. When you look at LL Cool J with his Kango and his big rope chain, that inspired a lot of young people to say, wow, that's a fashion statement right there. And so it inspired people to say, wow, that's the look of the day. These guys represent the streets. They are successful. I want to be like that. So I found that a lot of the artists of that time period, the early 80s, were very instrumental in setting the fashion trends. Do you think that's from music is where the fashion trends were coming from, or were popular musicians of that time period copying the styles that they were seeing on the streets?
I think it was a combination. I think that what we saw in, for instance, LL Cool J and Rakim and Eric B, that was the fashion of the street. So when I saw them guys, I felt good about it because to me it represented New York culture. There was the epitome in New York, because back in the days, each borough had its own style, every state had its style, and New York was unique within itself, especially me being in the military, because I was stationed with people from all over the country. So New York had its own unique look. And a lot of the rappers that came from the community, the artists, they represented that look, and it became very popular. So I think that, what I was seeing in those albums back then was a reflection of what was going on in the streets. And those guys just brought it there. They weren't the inventors of it. They just actually just represented what they saw around them.
Thank you. So you just answered my next question,
Okay.
but which was, who do you think it was that was setting urban trends in the 80s? But I had a supplemental question to that, which was, in terms of clothing, how was what was cool decided upon, and where were those clothes coming from?
I think it goes back to the artists again. When you have artists that are prominent, and they cool, not only are they dress sharp, but they're artists that are causing people to gravitate towards them. That kind of like sets the tone in terms of what's cool and what's fashionable. So it's guys like that. Sometimes it might be the guys who might be hustling on the street, who have the money to buy the latest fashions to look a certain way, and they became trendsetters as well. I don't really like to speak about that, but you might have guys that might be involved in certain activity that warrants them to wear a lot of chains and the latest of everything because of the money they're getting.
And where were those clothes coming from?
When I came up during the 1970s on to like really the early 1990s, we shopped at Delancey Street, Orchard and Delancey. That was the hub. It was a spot that was around since the 1950s. A lot of the Jewish immigrants came there, and it was a place in which you can buy clothes at a really discounted rate. And they work with you, and I mean really quality clothes. So Delancey Street was the place that many of us in Brooklyn and Manhattan went to on a regular. And even people from the tri-state area, you would find people from Philly, New Jersey come to Delancey Street as well. So that's where all the clothes really were, for urban fashion. Your sharkskin pants, your gabardines, your Italian knits, your footwear from Playboys, British Walkers, Pumas, Adidas. Everything was on Delancey Street. It was about a 4-block stretch of just stores, and everything was there. The sheepskins from head to toe. You can get your sneakers, from your velour hats, your glasses. Everything was on Delancey Street. For many years, we went there.
Interesting. I'm sure in the course of your work, you've had many, many interesting and unusual encounters with people who ended up being your subjects. I was wondering if you had any favorite anecdotes or stories that you would like to tell us.
The ones that I find so amusing are always centered around graffiti. Because I've had so many subjects. Some of my peers roll up on me and say, "You have a picture of my cousin and my brother in this photograph on page 56 in your book." And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. In that book, there's 2 homeless people on the train. And it said, no, it's the tag. That's my cousin and that over here, and the tag here, and that's my brother over here. And I was always blown away behind that because I never really looked at it that way before. I'm looking at the subjects on the train, but a lot of graffiti heads are actually looking at the artwork on the train, and they're seeing these tags that represent their family members or best friends. And I was utterly blown away behind that. And that's when I realized I had something really special. So it's those stories that always move me, in hearing things of that nature.
I love that. Last time when you were here, you spoke about incorporating a component of mentorship into your photography practice, and you've talked about this a little bit, but you've also formerly worked as an educator with youth programs.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, photography was given to me as a divine gift, and having the ability to see is a gift, and I feel that I have a duty and responsibility to take this gift and share it with other people, just like it was given to me. So it's an obligation. It's like really everything I have to share. I learned photography, I teach that. Chess was a very important component to my life. Chess, in a sense, taught me how to deal with conflict resolution, how to make right decisions. So I teach chess at the same time. So it's very important for me to just pass on what was given, to me as a gift to other people, especially young people. And I found that it makes a difference in their lives. I have to give back. I mean, I worked in a prison for 20 years. So I say a jail for 20 years of my life, and I saw misery. At the same time, I saw potential amongst a lot of the young incarcerated men, and I realized that a lot of times in life, all they needed was proper guidance and mentorship. And I vowed that, not even when I retired, because prior to retiring, I was doing it anyway, but I said once I retire, I'm going to devote myself full force to trying to help young people, guide them before they fall victim to the system. So it's a very important part of my being right now. And every opportunity I get to teach in schools or in the street, I'm doing it. I'm trying to just pass the torchlight on. I find that a lot of people are very receptive to not only photography, but my personal life journey. When they see me and they hear about my struggles, they see themselves. So it's very important to me. I just returned back from Minneapolis a few weeks ago, and I was afforded an opportunity to travel, in the footsteps of Gordon Parks and teach young people in the tradition of Gordon Parks. It was one of the greatest highlights of my life to not only teach them photography, but help to create a situation where these young kids, 15 and 16 years old, were able to exhibit their work for the first time in a noted museum aside the work of Gordon Parks. So it makes me feel beautiful to actually have the ability to pass on and give to the next generation. So it's a part of my life. Every single day, I'm trying to mentor young people constantly. I receive emails on a regular with young people seeking my advice, and I try to give it them to the best of my ability.
That's great. It's been something that's been part of your work since you were a teenager.
Yes.
You've continued. Overwhelmingly, the work that I've seen, or the pieces that we have within our collection, are shots that have been done in the public arena. But I was wondering if you ever do studio work.
I could pretty much stay away from it, and not that I don't like it, but it's something special and magical about the street. I like the spontaneity of it. There's a mystique. You really don't know what's around, each corner. So I like that intrigue. I just recently did a major ad campaign in the studio, and it was interesting. It was different, but I appreciate it at the same time. So I do it occasionally. I try to stay away from it because I'm grounded in the street. But I believe in being versatile at the same time. And when given an opportunity to shoot in the studio, I did my thing. I was able to really create an incredible body of work using lighting and assistance and having a production team around me. But my preference will always be the streets, just regular, everyday people.
So tell us a little bit about because you work as a fashion photographer as well, you just mentioned that. How do you conceptualize the relationship between your fashion photography work and the photographs that you take on the street? Is it important to you that they have your signature style or the same aesthetic, or are they two different animals to you?
I think it's really one and the same, because it's all fashion. If you look at all of the photographs in which I've shot, for the most part, it just be just candid images. It's all about the fashion elements are always there, because I photograph a fashionable people. It seems like within my community, everyone's about really looking good, so the strategies are all the same. And oftentimes I'm hired to do fashion shoots in a similar light to my street photography. I mean, this photographs in this collection right here, the majority of them are fashion shoots, traditional fashion shoots for publications. But you look at it, it's no different from my regular photography. So it's pretty much the same. There's no difference at all, other than just some of it just going into publications.
This particular photograph, could you tell us a little bit about this one? This
photograph was for Jalouse magazine, a French publication, and I was invited to shoot in my particular style. And it was interesting. A lot of the magazines, they come to me and they say, we just want you to do your thing. We're not going to give you any direction, just create magic. So these are just regular people I knew from the neighborhood, that I saw potential in. The young man was somebody who I just saw a talent in. And it makes me feel good to just approach young people, not only to photograph them, and say, you know what, you have the ability to be a model. I want to put you down with this photo shoot and just show your greatness. So he never had modeled before, and I brought him to the shoot. He never knew the young lady, and I just created this situation. I scouted the location before. I found a beautiful wall that coincided with the clothing they had, and I was able to just create this right here. It's a very important photograph to me because it actually helped boost the self-confidence of the young man and made him like a star in the community. And tragically, he lost his life a couple years later. So I was able to capture a side of him that no one really knew before. But with my fashion photography, I always try to include everyday people to make them feel like stars. I kind of like stay away from the casting calls and just get people I meet on the street and try to get them a start.
When you do work with professional models, what's the difference between working with professional models versus someone perhaps that you just know as a friend?
The professional model is trained, so he understands the dynamics of the whole situation. So they have patience, they have understanding. They understand how to pose and move. So I kind of like that about that. But there's another side of the person who's not a model that I'm in a position now to give them the guidance and direction, and that's a part of the creative process too. The struggle sometimes to take someone that has never modeled before and make them a model. Help them understand they have the ability to do that. So I like that challenge at the same time. So I always go towards the non-traditional model versus the traditional model, because it's just the challenge of it all. The whole creative process for me to take a person from the street who's never modeled before and make them look like they've been doing this all their lives.
Well, you would never guess these are exquisite. This one is a fashion photograph too, as well.
Yes, it is.
If I'm not mistaken, yes.
This is a very interesting one right here. I shot this for Pro Kids, and what they wanted to do, they wanted to see what the 1970s looked like. So I found this young man, another young person who had aspirations of being a model. He had never shot before. So I called him up and said, I want you for this campaign right here. So I actually styled him, because most of the fashion shoots I do, I style a lot of my subjects. So in this photograph here, he has on my pants, my shirt, and my hat. And I decided to take him down to the Lansing Street, the Lower East Side, where that was the fashion hub back in the days in terms of where we purchased our clothes. And I decided to really give it that old school feel. I shoot it in black and white, utilizing film against the old school backdrop that is no longer there. So I love to be in a position to recreate, because it's not only about capturing the image, but I love to work as a stylist because I understand how it looks. Having lived that era, to me, this represents the 70s. Even though it was shot, I believe, in 2003, it still has the true feel of 1977, and that's what I was trying to capture in this image.
That's great. And I think we have another image that you styled as well.
Yes. And this is a very interesting photograph right here. A young man, a young actor. And this is also for Jalouse magazine, and my hat, my shirt, my glasses. And I just wanted to create a look that was unique. And I love the urban landscape as a backdrop. I love concrete walls, I love gates, I love greenery. And just a basic portrait right here. It's just I had a vision, because a lot of times I have these visions at night in my dreams, and I wake up in the middle and I just write them down. So okay, I have to do this right here. This particular shirt will work, and let me just work with this right here. So I styled it, shot it, and I wanted to create an old school, in a sense, like an old school, new school look, because the clothing line Dada came out in the late 1980s. So you have a news fashion, and then the hat and the glasses represent the early 80s. So I'm bringing two elements together to, in a sense, create my own style.
I know early on in your photographs, when you were more documenting people's lives, it wasn't your singular intent to capture the clothing, but do you think it would be a fair assessment to call yourself one of the very first street fashion photographers?
Oh, by no means. I'm not. When I look at the work of Helmut Newton, that's one of the best to me, one of the first. I'm not going to even say one of the first, but there's so many that shot the streets before me. Helmut really did his thing. I love how he documented it. I'm just coming along, just doing my thing. I love the streets, and I'm honored with that accolade, but I can't hold on to that. There's so many more, and countless others who have not gained the recognition as myself that really deserve that title. I'm just a documentarian.
And which leads me to another question. And in the scope of contemporary photography at large, how do you view your own work? Do you see them as portraits? Do you see them as documentary images, all of journalism? Do you see them as fine art? How do you think your work fits into contemporary photography?
My work is a combination of so much. I mean, this just represents just a small segment of what I do. I have thousands upon thousands of images, and I have to give my father a lot of thanks and praise, because he helped me to understand, the vision. He taught me themes. So within my work, there's fashion, there's fine art, there's documentary, there's landscapes. It's a whole range of images that I created during my lifetime. I mean, there's portraiture. So it's just a lot. And I think that as time goes on, I'll be in a better position to really share it. That's why for me to donate this work to this institution is so important to me, because I wanted to show that I did do fashion. But there's a whole nother body of work that's documentary. There's a whole nother body of work that's purely fine art photography. I'm working on a new book now called Unposed, which is strictly unposed spontaneous moments. So there's a wide range, and I've had a lot of teachers in my life that just gave me different viewpoints on how to look at photography. So I'm not limited to one particular field. It's just a cross section, but it's all under the title of a visual journal, a visual diary.
And you've had a number of gallery exhibitions all over the world. I think this past summer you were in Paris or Germany?
I was in Amsterdam early last year. I did a show at the Mill Museum in Minneapolis a few months ago. I mean, there's a lot of exhibitions. I'm very fortunate that my work has been, because that's one of the things I want to do, is really have my work in museums versus the galleries. Because I was never really open to have my work sold. I feel it's about being preserved in collections more so than in galleries. So I'm very fortunate. I do at least 10 major museum exhibitions a year.
Excellent. Technology has changed quite a bit since you first started with photography. Do you still shoot film? I know you originally were shooting film. Do you do digital or a little bit of both?
I do a combination of both. I still love the look of film, so I use a medium format camera strictly for film, black and white. But I love digital photography now too for two reasons. First is that I'm in a position to take a photograph of my subjects on the street and show them and get that instant smile, which means the world to me. Because it's really about that. I want to secure the legacy of the people I photograph. So having a digital camera now, my 5D Mark II, I'm able to just turn it around after I shoot and just show them the image and let them see that smile. It's priceless. It means the world. It's something I didn't get really back in the days because I would have to wait a couple of days to give them the photographs. But now I could take a photograph, let them see it, and I can upload it and email it to them. And that means so much. It makes the process so much easier right now. So I embrace digital photography, and I say that 90% of the work I do now is in a digital format.
Are there any particular photographers whose work inspired your own, or what else inspires you visually?
Okay, so many photographers have inspired me. I was initially drawn to war photography. Being my father was a Navy photographer, a lot of the books that we had in our home early on were based on war. So it was Philip Jones Griffin, who documented the Vietnam War, the conflict in Northern Ireland. Of course, Leonard Freed, who, that was the first photography book I saw, coming up as a young man. The work of Gordon Parks taught me the versatility of photography because in Gordon's work, you have fashion, fine art, documentary. And of course, James Van Der Zee, whose work inspired me greatly. And today, there's James Natchway. I think that the war photographers of the day are incredible. I give them nothing but props. I have great admiration and respect for all of these guys. Tyler Hicks, I follow his work constantly. So that's where my inspiration really comes from, the courage that those guys have. And again, Helmut Newton was very instrumental in my street photography. So, and I can't forget Joseph Rodriguez because through his work, he did a book called Spanish Harlem. He taught me the beauty of the community and the importance of documenting it.
And on that note, we've actually pulled a few photographs that you have selected as having an interesting backstory or having something especially important about them that you would like to share with us. So I'm going to put a few on the stand, and if you would like to comment on them, that would be great.
Okay, this particular photograph was made in 1980 in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York at Tilden High School. And it represents one of the first photographs I took upon returning home to the United States after being stationed in Germany. I went to my local high school. These are two young women I met, and I instantly fell in love with twins. And I said, from this point on, I'm going to start documenting twins. So this is right across the street from the school, but they were very fashionable. And I approached them. They were open. And it became really a classic photograph for me, and it started this whole idea of wanting to photograph twins. So for the past 35 years now, I've been documenting them, and I like it a lot because, like I said, the fashion element is there. This represents a time in which women wore skirts and shoes, unlike today where you see women wearing sneakers. Back then, it was pretty much forbidden for a woman to wear sneakers. If she did have them, she had them in her pocketbook, and she wore them for gym. And just the style they have here. A lot of these women, they design their own clothes. Back then they had a class called home economics where they learned how to sew and cook, and a lot of these women, they were making their own clothing. It's a very special photograph,
I didn't realize until now that they were twins. I thought they were sisters, but now that I look at the photograph closer, absolutely.
Yes.
What is it about twins that you like?
I like photographing two people, first of all. So when you have twins, it's just a certain magic and it's a bond that's there. It's a connection, just that love. I mean, same with sisters. But the twins, I guess I was just fascinated with it. Just the fact that you have two women that could be identical. And it's like, wow, it's just something magical about that whole idea.
And another photograph of two women, not twins, I do not believe.
No, not twins, just this is a very interesting photograph here. This is one of my self-assignments that I did on fashion. And I came up with an idea of utilizing cowboy hats. So these women, they don't know each other. I met one on the train one day, and I met the other one traveling. I decided I'm going to do a fashion show. And I said, bring hats, bring accessories. So they bought these two hats, and I created this situation where as if they look like they're best friends, but it's just ironic they don't know each other. So I like bringing two elements together. And the photo editor, George Pitts, once recognized something in my work that I didn't really understand at the time. He says, you shoot two people well, And I started to realize that I do. It's something about two people that kind of like really just gives it flavor. One person, is all right, but when you have two people, you could kind of like just be more creative. So this photograph was taken in Tribeca back around 2000, and I just used the urban landscape as my studio, and I would just meet everyday people and say, I'd like to photograph you. Come down to Lower Manhattan, because I love the cobblestone streets, I love the alleyways, and I would just create these photographs and just do it for me, but also do it for them. I'll give them copies of the images just so they have something for their archives.
Do you ever find people resistant to your request to photograph them?
I think today more so than 20 years ago, because everyone has a camera. Now with the internet, people are very suspicious about your intentions. Back when I first started out, if you had a camera, you was either a tourist or you were a photographer. So people were more receptive back then. Today, it's a little challenging, but I still get results because I always carry a body of work with me. And I think over time, I kind of like develop a name for myself. So when I mention my name, a lot of people familiar with my work, so they find, they're pretty open.
You selected this one as being one of your favorites as well.
What makes this photograph interesting is that when you find young women, I call this best friends actually, when you have a crew of females dressed this way, they want to be seen, they want to be noticed. So I find that, this is like, because it's about body language as a photographer too. You have to look at a subject and know if this person is going to say yes or no. But when you see 4 girls dressed in this way, they're saying photograph me. Somebody recognized me. So the reason why I point this one out, because this is a definite yes. For any aspiring photographer, when you see women dressed identical, it's kind of like this. That's like an indication that these women are open to be seen, to be documented.
Do you remember where they were headed or where you met these ladies?
Met them at an event, in Brooklyn. It was a party in Brooklyn. And they rolled up, and I said, wow, this is kind of hot here. So I took them to the balcony and created the shot here, just using, fill and flash.
That's great. This one you also said was important to you.
Yes, this is a photograph taken in Prospect Park, and it is the center of a new book I'm working on called Prospect Park, an Oasis in Brooklyn. And for 35 years, I've used Prospect Park as my studio. And I would bring a lot of my models there to photograph. So these are 2 young women I met one day in Long Island, and I had a desire to photograph them in a different setting. And I decided to invite them to Prospect Park and just photograph them. And it was just something special about this image that represents best friends and a connection. And it just kind of like just drew my eye. And again, it's my way of not only styling, but creating the situation at the same time. The image is just thought-provoking. And that's very important to me, to capture images that show something, show love and connection. So I pointed this one out because Prospect Park is very dear to me. And it's been a place I went to escape the concrete, to meditate, but also do a lot of my photography. So I say that maybe 50% of the work I do here in New York City is in Prospect Park.
Wow. Another portion of your work that we haven't yet looked at is often shot in the subway.
Yes.
This photograph actually this is not the original. This photograph is actually on loan to the museum at FIT right now. It's included in the exhibition Trendology, so this is a printout of the photograph. But tell us a little bit about working on the subway.
Okay, well, I love the subways mainly for the available light. The ambient light is beautiful, and during the winter months and the rainy days, I would find the subways were a perfect place to go to shoot, because I love photography, so I carry a camera everywhere I go. So you find a lot of my work, the subways pretty much serve as a backdrop, like my studios. And it's just so many elements is there for me. It's like this is a mistake too, because I used to travel car to car just looking for subjects. And if I don't see anything going on one car, I get off the train and get on another train and walk car to car just looking for different situations, both from people to homelessness to spirit. It's all in the subways. I shot police officers, everything. The trains have been a part of my work since the 1980s, and I still shoot to this very day on them. This particular photograph here was made in around about maybe 2002. It was a cold, this is a prime example, it was a cold winter day. Matter of fact, one of the coldest days of the year. It's for a magazine called Black Book, and they wanted to do a retro fashion shoot. And it was very interesting. I couldn't get the day off from work, so I shot this on my lunch period in my uniform, and I had one of the worst toothaches of my entire life. So I'm on a tight lunch schedule to shoot this in an hour. I have this painful toothache. It's a blizzard outside. I have to do a summer shoot on a train. So I took these subjects on the number 6 train, the down number 6 train at, I believe, City Hall. and I was able to capture these shots here, giving it an old school feel. So it's a very close photograph to me because the backstory is just incredible. I mean, people could look at it and see like a pretty interesting pose and think it's the dead of the summer, but here it is February, freezing outside. You know, I have a toothache and I'm on my lunch period, but I was able to deliver the photo shoot and get a nice, I think, 9-page spread in that publication.
This, if you were shooting this on your lunch break, how did the styling happen so quickly? Just out of curiosity.
I had a vision already, and we had the trailer, so I was able to just conceive the idea I want, and I knew what I want. I shoot fast. I'm not a photographer. It takes about 2-3 rolls of film to get what I want. I shoot no different when I shot like 30 years ago. You know, every shot has to count. So I'll shoot maybe 4 shots and I got it. So the styling was just simple. You know, guys all had like probably heavy coats on. We went in the train station, took the coats off right quick. We shot and we just kept moving. So that's pretty much how I roll. Like I said, I know what I want, because a lot of times I do my research ahead of time. So I study the lighting, everything I need to know. So all I need to do is get my subjects, let's do this right quick. So it took no more than maybe 10 minutes to the tops to get this particular photograph. And most of my fashion it's no more than 10 minutes.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to add about your work in general or the collection that you've donated us here? I know that you selected these images that are in what we have specifically for their relation to fashion.
Yes. Well, for the most part, I cannot overemphasize how grateful I am to have vision. And I feel that in having the ability to see, you know, I have a duty and responsibility to use my creativity, my vision, to contribute to the preservation of world history and culture. And that's what I really aspire to do. And my life's mission is to do that. To not only to donate my artwork to collection, but also to teach the craft so the next generation of young visionaries can go on and record and do the same thing. And this particular work here, I feel it belongs here. You know, I've been impressed with this school for so many years. It's the nucleus for fashion worldwide, and I felt there was no better place than to have my fashion work here. I donate various bodies at different institutions. I've just finished donating a body of work to the Bronx Museum of Arts, and that's my portrait series. I donated my Brooklyn body of work to the Brooklyn Public Library, but I felt that my fashion works belongs here, and I knew that it would be appreciated. And just me being here right now is clear evidence that my work is embraced here. So I will be a supporter for the rest of my days, and I know that my work has a true home, and just the fact that it's in the new exhibition Trinology is an example of knowing that it's in the right place. Not only is it going to be preserved, but it's going to be exhibited at the same time.
Yes. And we appreciate it very much. That concludes my questions. Also present here today, we actually have Alex Joseph, who is the editor of Hue Magazine, and I would like to invite him to add any additional questions that he might have.
Actually, I wanted to talk about fashion and clothes.
Okay.
And I'm interested in, I know that a lot of artists have clothes that they work with in their studio. That's been true for hundreds of years.
Yes.
And you mentioned that in these cases, you can maybe bring this into the picture again, that you gave them these clothes?
Yes, I actually
wear?
brought some of the clothes with me too to just show you.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
I have clothing from the 1970s. I can't throw away clothes. I'm glad I held on to it because I use a lot of my clothes in a lot of my retro fashion shoots. And like the photograph behind you, the guy with the blue shirt on and blue and white pants. You know, not only those clothes, my clothes, but I designed the pants.
Oh, you designed? So you designed?
Yeah, I design clothes. I'll show you some of my designs. Can I get it up? That's important to me to incorporate my clothing because it gives an authentic feel, and that's very important to really capture the essence of that time period, having original clothes. So I've collected so much over the course of my life, and I use everything in my fashion shoots. I mean, all these elements come into play when I shoot, from the glasses, the pants. Back in the 1970s, you know, many of us, we wanted to be unique in our style. So we would go on the Lancey shoot, we would buy traditional clothing, but it came a particular time too that we wanted to stand out. So, you know, we would buy the fabric on the Lancey Street and we create our own styles. This is here's my initial here in a pair of pants to just do something different.
Show that to the
Yeah.
camera.
And this is sharkskin material here that we would get on Delancey Street. And then we had a tailor around the corner. On the matter of fact, our tailor came from Brooklyn Moons, a Dominican tailor that would style it for us. So I would come up with a style. And this is another style that we would do, something different.
Wow.
You know, just to have our own particular flavor. You know, traditional pocket here, but this made it stand out. And I'll use these pants in photo shoots to bring back a whole nother look that you won't find in traditional fashion settings. This is another pair of pants that I designed back in the days, and I just wanted to add my own flavor to it, like a zipper. It's just something a little bit different. And being I can't wear them anymore, I have my models wear them, to bring them back to life.
When did you have these pants made? Do you know?
These pants were made in 1980.
1980.
So I have clothing from the 1980s. I have clothing from the 1970s. I have my Gazelle glasses I incorporate in the photo shoots. So the subject here, he has my glasses on. So I bring all these items out to make it feel as authentic as possible.
Right.
Even down to bracelets, accessories. These are accessories that we had back in the 1970s, and this is something that people really don't know about, the history behind the bracelet. Because if you put this on a male subject, it takes it to a whole nother level that people may not even notice. But there's little details like this here, it makes it authentic. Because back in the old days, when you had a relationship with a woman, this bonded you and that woman, because the women wore them. So, we used to have the saying back in the day, will you go with me? And she says, yes, I'll go with you. So she would take off her bracelet, give it to you, and you would wear it. So oftentimes when a man wore a West Indian bracelet, it symbolized that you dealt with a woman, that you were in a sense engaged. So it became a tradition. So I have all these here to kind of like tell that oral story too. That's very vital. So I would incorporate these in photo shoots. I like the glasses, everything. It's so much I have. I have my shoes. I might incorporate album covers in the backdrop to kind of like give it a certain feel. So I collect so much material. And I had my first pair of pants I designed in 1978 in Germany. I can't wear them. I had a 28 waist in, but later on in the photo shoot, if someone's looking for a retro look from the 70s, I can go back to my collection and bring that stuff out. So it gives it a life at the same time. So I have so much.
So how do you feel that fashion has changed over time?
Well, fashion today is very interesting versus how it was when I grew up, because we took great pride in the way that we look. And not to take anything away from this generation, but never in my life would I have imagined that young kids can embrace a simple white T-shirt. And it became a phenomenon back in the early 2000s, where just the white T-shirt. It's like, wow, that's kind of boring. It's economical if you don't really have, but at the same time, it's nothing really edgy about it. We were young teenagers, because a lot of the photographs in my book are back in the days and time before crack. These guys were, I'll say, between the ages of 17 to maybe 25 years old. So young people took great pride in how they look. Today, anything goes. It doesn't really make a difference anymore. I look around and I see things that's very interesting to me. You don't see a lot of young people wearing ties. Back then we wore ties. We wore two-piece suits. We always wore shoes for the most part. It was a cross between shoes and sneakers. I find today when I speak to young people about shoes, they associate shoes with being sneakers. They go to the prom with sneakers on. Where back in the day, we went to prom with shoes on. So it's a very different time period. Even today, women wear sneakers, where back in the days, women didn't. It wasn't considered feminine back then. So it's very interesting. The hairstyles are different. We took great pride in our hair, having our parts and our waves and all that. Today, everything goes. So it's different.
It's interesting because, I think when you say that about sneakers, I think about actually someone in the film about you describing, do you remember this in the film? There's a scene with sneakers, and one of the people who's talking about one of your pictures says, oh yeah, I recognize every single one of these sneakers. So I'm thinking like, well, people in your photographs, they came up with the winning strategy, which was to wear the best sneakers and to really encode them in a way so that they have all these different meanings. They're not just sneakers anymore.
Right, because it was visible, and back then a lot of people didn't have cars, so people saw your exterior. Right, so your footwear, people were drawing the words, everything from top to bottom. Because back then, if you wore sneakers, your shoelaces might match your hat. You brought style to your sneakers. You brought flavor to them. And back then they weren't overpriced. And we only had like maybe 4 pair of sneakers back then in terms of sneakers the sneaker companies. Your Pumas, your Adidas, maybe your Nikes, your Reeboks. And that was pretty much it. And sneakers stayed in style for a long time. The traditional Adidas sneaker and the traditional Puma, Clyde Puma, was in style from the 70s on into the 80s. Unlike today, the sneakers is constantly changing. Like every 6 months there's a new sneaker out. And a lot of these guys are trying to stay up with those styles. Back then, the styles last a little bit longer.
I know you dress the male models, but do the women, like these women, or these
particular women here, they bought the clothes.
Oh.
I came up with the idea, they bought the clothes. I saw her with those pants on. I said, you know what, those are kind of hot pants. You need to bring them to the photo shoot. And the cowboy hats. I came the idea for hats. And that kind of like worked, you know, because I guess for me it goes back to the the tradition of gang culture with the cowboy hats. So I wanted to create something to bring that look back into play, but with women right now, because this photograph will complement the guys with the hats on. And in retrospect, I would have got 2 guys with these hats on next to 2 girls like that to bring it out.
Right.
But I normally come up with ideas, you know, and I'll tell people to bring this. The idea today is red. We're going to shoot red and black. So colors or, you know, different themes I just create and just tell my subjects to bring that to play. And I just, you know, let's see if this works.
So not only are you sourcing your models from people that you meet in public, also the clothes that are in the shoots oftentimes belong to them.
Yes, it's a combination. With the women, it's their clothes. With the men, a lot of times it's my clothes. So sometimes I like to incorporate my clothes because a lot of it just brings it makes it personal for me. Like the photograph right there, the guy with the bicycle. Those are all my clothes again. And his whole look is totally different from this right here. I wanted to create a particular look, and I felt the only way I can get it was to incorporate my clothing. You know, and this whole element here. You look at this photograph here, most people from my generation say this is, and I love to hear them argue about this here. That's another thing that I find amusing. I'll show this picture and people will argue, this is definitely 1975. I could tell by the sneakers here and that bike, I had that same bike in 1976. I'm laughing because I was saying, because I shot this in 2000. But what makes it unique, they might even say, look at the pants. Look at the zipper right there. Those are tailor-made pants. And look at the Italian knit shirt he has on. But I want every detail to be precise. You know, we were walking, when I did this photo shoot, we were walking around, I saw the old school wall, I saw the bike, I said this is perfect to give it that old school feel. You know, so I love to do these type of recreations to kind of like throw people off and to have people really get it. And I shot it with film, it's a fiber print, so I try to keep everything traditional to give it that particular aesthetic.
Maybe you should have your own line of clothes.
I'm working on that. You know, that's why I'm here. That's the next step.
All right. Well,
I've been designing clothes. I designed this jacket right here. So you know, it's something that's the fashion element is a part of me. It's there for a long time. And me, my friends and I, we did it for fun. We never did it for anyone else but us. So this is like a traditional style, you know, and we were like, I don't want to say like 2 little girls going button shopping, but we used to look for certain buttons because we used to look at the clothing and say, this is kind of like boring. But if you add tailor-made buttons to it, it enhances the outfit. So that's something I've always wanted to do. Between styling, I always wanted to be a fashion photographer, I've done that. I wanted to be a stylist, I've done that. Now the next level is my clothing line. And I call it positive wear. You know, I wanted to show young people the importance of wearing certain clothing that creates a certain type of feeling. You know, even the point of colors. I was taught back in the days of certain colors you shouldn't wear. So a lot of the colors I wore in my youth were like earth colors. Colors that gave off a certain type of energy.
What do you mean by it? You were taught that there were certain colors that you shouldn't wear.
Believe it or not, you know, in growing up in the 70s, red was a forbidden color. You know, and not because of gang affiliation, but it was a color that was considered a temptation, a color of temptation. Mm-hmm. So you never really wore red back then. So just, you know, purple was a color that people didn't wear. You know, it seems kind of strange, but you know, it's just we were taught that it gave us some type of energy. You know, so green was a color that represented life. So that became my favorite color. You know, a lot of earth type colors, and you just really didn't see people wear. Like I said, red was forbidden. Today, red is a popular color, forbidden in certain areas, but for most, it's a popular color. And I'm still pretty much like that today. There's certain colors I won't wear. You know.
Interesting. Well, if Alex doesn't have any other questions to add, Alessandro, anything you'd like to ask Jamel? I'd like to thank you very, very, very much again.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to have you back visiting us and seeing more of your photographs exhibited at FIT. And we will always, of course, welcome lots more into the collection should you be so kind.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, April. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Jamal.